What's going on, everybody? Shinobi here. Shockwave grenades have returned to Fortnite, and I'm going to teach you how to master this powerful mobility item. Unlike most other mobility items, shockwaves require some skill and knowledge to use properly. You may have been struggling to use shockwaves in the past, but no longer. Today, you're going to become a shockwave wizard that makes 200 IQ plays. You're going to go from being this guy to being this guy.
Oh yeah.
Shockwave grenades are so powerful because they're very versatile and can immediately bring you to another location with no cooldowns and no risk of being shot out of the status effect. They're also super fun. And now I'm going to show you all the secrets to get the most out of them. Watch the whole video to ensure you've mastered all the subtle tricks of this powerful equipment item. Shockwaves are a ball of kinetic energy that shoot players away from them without causing fall damage. Shockwaves have an exact max radius effect of 1 tile space away from the grenade. The further you throw the grenade from you, the lower of an angle it will throw you. The closer the grenade is to you, the more it will send you upward. We'll dive into why that's important later. Let's quickly cover shockwave jumps. A lot of people are inaccurate with their shockwave jumps because they don't realize something about the throwing mechanic. When you look straight down to throw a shockwave grenade at your feet, you'll notice that it's actually being thrown off center toward your right leg. If you were to just throw the shockwave straight down and run past it, it's going to launch you to the left every time. This is because the shockwave pushes you away from its exact center point. So in order to get a straight and accurate jump, you need to align your character's center with the center of the shockwave grenade. All you need to do is throw the grenade down and strafe slightly to the right as you run forward, and it will launch you in a straight line every time. Now, you want to jump about 1 second after you throw the grenade for maximum height and distance, unless you want to stay low to the ground. Once you're in the air, you can move your character a little bit to correct your trajectory. A well-timed shockwave jump will cover 12 tile lengths of air time. A common misconception is that you need to be sprinting forward to reach maximum distance while shockwaving, but after testing it thoroughly, there is no difference. So it's better to just jog forward and focus on getting good center alignment and timing your jump rather than sprinting and trying to do everything all at once. Now, if you want to cover maximum distance or be hard to hit, you'll want to slide on your landing. You'll need to hit your slide button about half a second before you land to make your character do a super slide. Now you know the basics of using shockwaves to cover distance quickly, but there's much more to learn. Next up, we want to chain a super slide into another shockwave jump. This is done by throwing the shockwave ahead of you by about a character length, but that throw distance can change depending on how fast you are moving. You'll need to throw a shorter distance if you're moving slow and a longer distance if you're moving fast. This same rule applies if you're sliding down a hill with speed and need to shockwave jump away. You'll need to throw the shockwave a fair distance ahead of you to get a good jump. Once you learn to master the slide throwing technique, you can cover a lot of ground quickly and get out of bad situations without being caught up to. Those dirty little gremlins will never get you. Now let's talk about optimal shockwave control. If you're looking to go a long distance, you want to keep jogging past the shockwave and jump about half a second after throwing it. If you want to go high with lots of control, you want to just barely walk past it and make sure you strafe to the right so that you're centered during the blast. If you're trying to shockwave onto high objects, you only need to inch past the shockwave for max height and control. If you're going for height, the timing of your jump doesn't matter as much as the proximity of your character to the grenade. Now, shockwaves can get you up to 7 stories high if you position yourself correctly, which is pretty much higher than any building in the game except for Mega City. But if you run too far from the grenade or you're at a bad angle, you will struggle to get onto high objects accurately. Now, shockwaves can also be used when you're standing still or from behind cover. You don't have to use them while running. A big advantage to this is using shockwaves to throw yourself through structures and break down walls or floors. The amount of walls or floors broken depends on horizontal or vertical movement. A shockwave grenade will always throw you through 2 tile lengths horizontally and break down a minimum of 2 walls or a maximum of 3 walls, depending on how far your character is from the first wall. You can do an advanced trick to make yourself only break through 1 wall, but it involves throwing your shockwave grenade at an elevated corner and falling below to push you at a 45-degree angle toward the ground. This can be used to break into a player's box instead of breaking through both walls, or to break only a single floor of a building. Shockwave grenades will throw you through a total of 4 ceilings or floors. You can do this to go up or down. You can also shockwave from the ground floor of a 4-story building onto the roof with no problem. But If you're in a building with over 4 floors, it won't break the 5th floor ceiling. You'll just hit your head on the 5th floor and immediately stop and probably fall straight down. So keep that in mind if you're trying to get on top of a building. If you're in a 5-story building, you'll need to go up to the 2nd floor in order to shockwave through the building and onto the top of it. You can also shockwave yourself downwards through 4 floors as well. It ends up being more of a falling action, but it still breaks the floors below you and gets you down fast. Now when throwing shockwaves, you don't have to throw them straight down and run past them to launch. You can throw them at any angle to you and they will push you away from its center. This is good if you're behind cover and you don't have room to sprint. Just quickly aim behind you and throw a shockwave grenade to launch yourself through the cover. I will say that it can be very difficult to throw the shockwave straight behind you perfectly centered. I still have not mastered a perfect 180-degree throw. Most times I turn around to throw it, I will end up going outwards at about a 30-degree angle. It's not bad in most cases because it gives you more breathing room from an enemy, but I wanted to mention that it definitely requires muscle memory to master a straight shot like this. You can also use the compass at the top of your screen to calculate a 180-degree throw perfectly every time. Now let's talk about shockwaving other players. Shockwaves can be used offensively to knock opponents out of cover or power positions, put them in the storm, or just make the fight awkward for them. The easiest way to land a good shockwave on someone who's on top of a high spot is to shockwave up above them and then throw a shockwave down on them. This is great if someone's on a mountain or is on top of a tall build. You can also hurt an opponent badly at the end of the game by shockwaving them out of the circle and into the storm. This puts huge pressure on them and can make the win easy for you. If you suspect someone's camping in a bush, you can easily knock them out by throwing a shockwave into it. You can also use shockwaves to knock yourself through a tree that someone is hiding in and make an opponent fall, often causing them to take fall damage. The same goes for structures when the floor falls out below them. So I urge you to always be thinking about how to use a shockwave in a creative way when you know an enemy is hiding somewhere or has you pinned. Now let's talk about shockwaving teammates. This can be tricky, so I found the best way is to have your teammates stand still and face you. Then throw a shockwave at their feet. Make sure to line it up so that their path doesn't lead them into an object. This way they can jump at the right time and they can just turn around in the air and land in a slide. Another quick tip is that if you've maxed out your stack of shockwaves, you can throw a shockwave down and pick up another shockwave to quickly replace it before the blast goes off and you leave the ground. Or if it's your last shockwave, you can fill your slot with another item before leaving the ground. In this chapter, you can combine the soaring sprints augment with shockwave grenades to cover an insane amount of distance or height in a single jump. Unfortunately, the soaring sprints augment is pretty rare. I'd estimate it's about a 5% chance of getting it after doing quite a bit of testing. I rolled a total of 55 augments and got it twice during the test. So you really can't expect to get it every game and you'll probably run out of gold if you try. But when you do get it, you can throw a shockwave down and then sprint ahead of it to get the low gravity effect as the shockwave detonates. You can practically cover half of the jungle with a single soaring sprint shockwave. You can use the same principles as before too. So if you want to go high, then you should throw the shockwave straight down and then wait a second, then immediately sprint jump to launch you nearly straight into orbit. And if you want to go far, then throw the shockwave straight down at your feet and then immediately sprint and jump as far away from it as possible. This will get you the most speed and distance possible. One thing I'll mention is that you should be careful using soaring sprints and the shockwave grenade when you're out in the open because you get so much airtime that you can get fried pretty easily by players with good aim if you're going straight at them or straight away from them. So if you are shockwaving through open space with soaring sprints and enemies nearby, try to kind of get an angle to your jumps to make yourself hard to hit. Now let's cover shockwave strategies because this is often going to be the way that you win games. First of all, you always want shockwaves during the end game when there are less than 15 players left. This is because the circle is small and dense with enemies, which means you can easily be caught off guard. Shockwaves are a lot better than grapple gloves, ODM, or spiderwebs because you can't be shot out of the status effect, so you can always use them repeatedly. If you're playing in any sort of team game, you want to use shockwaves to get flank angles on your opponents while they're distracted by your teammates. This is easily done because people don't notice the shockwave noise during combat and there's no visual audio to track it. You can shockwave straight behind them or to the side of them to make them an easy target without cover. One of the best methods for securing kills without taking much damage is by shockwaving onto the top of trees. People have a hard time tracking a shockwave because it doesn't have visual audio cues and they can go in any direction. So if you want to turn the odds of a fight, shockwave into a tree and start peek shotting opponents. I've won many games against bad odds by just shockwaving from tree to tree. The danger of this is if people break the tree from below you. A lot of times if you get into trouble and you have a stack of shockwave grenades, you can just keep using them every time you land until your enemy loses track of you. Then you can take a second to heal or get a nice drop on them. And the final strategy is just to take high ground with shockwaves and clear opponents off high ground with your shockwaves. I highly recommend practicing your shockwave jumps in a creative lobby with other players. Also practice using shockwaves against enemy players to get in the mindset of using them offensively. Awesome, you are now a shockwave wizard. And now that you've mastered the shockwave movement, you should begin to master your combat movement. You can do that by watching this video right here. I promise it's going to help you out. Thank you for watching. Have yourself a good day. Shinobi out.